She said "I do" at 3:14 in the afternoon, and she was looking at me when she said it. Not at him. Not at the man she had just promised her life to, who was standing close enough that she could have reached out and touched his face. Not at the efficient, or the flowers, or the soft late afternoon light falling across the white chairs. She was looking at me. In the third row, holding someone else's wedding program like a man trying to find something to do with his hands. I didn't move. I don't think I breathed. And then she looked away, and the officiant said something about rings, and the world resumed. I have thought about that moment every day for 6 months. I have turned it over the way you turn over something you found in the water, not sure if it's valuable, not sure if it's just a rock, not sure if the light was doing something strange. What I keep coming back to is this. She knew what she was doing. Nadia Chen always knows exactly what she's doing. She is the sharpest person I have ever met, and she does not look at the wrong person by accident. Not ever. My name is James Calloway. I'm 34. I do structural assessments for mid-size commercial builds. I look at things and tell people whether they will hold. There is a certain irony in that, given everything. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that has a second room I use mostly for storing things I should have thrown away 3 years ago. I own a coffee maker that requires more steps than my job, and I have made peace with this. I am, by most reasonable measures, a man who has his life in reasonable order and does not spend a lot of time on things he cannot explain. Nadia was the exception to that last part. I met her 7 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, when we both reached for the same bottle of wine at the same time. And she said, without looking up, "I had it first." I told her I didn't think that was true. She told me the data didn't support my position. We stood there for 4 seconds, each holding one end of a bottle of Malbec, and then she smiled, quick and a little reluctant, like she was annoyed at herself for finding me amusing, and said, "Fine." We split it. That was the whole story. That was where it started. 7 years of her, 7 years of the small green plant she kept on her desk that was genuinely thriving against all odds. 7 years of the contact name she had for me in her phone, which I only learned about later, and which I will get to. And 7 years of the particular way she laughed when something surprised her, which was different from the laugh she performed in groups. Shorter and more real, like it had gotten out before she could manage it. She met Daniel 18 months before the wedding. Daniel was fine. He was perfectly, adequately, unimpeachably fine. He had good posture and a considerate personality, and he was kind to her in the uncomplicated way that people are kind when nothing has ever really tested them. I told myself this was enough. I told myself a lot of things. I had, by that point, developed an extensive internal library of reasons why what I felt about Nadia was nothing more than a very close friendship, and I was deeply committed to that library, and I consulted it often. The first crack appeared about 8 months before the wedding. We were in her kitchen. She had called me over to help move a bookshelf, which turned into me moving the bookshelf while she directed from the couch with a glass of wine, and she got a phone call. She stepped into the hallway. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, and it lit up when the call came through. I wasn't trying to see it. I was just standing there, sweating, holding one end of a very heavy shelf, and the screen was right there. The contact name was not Daniel. It was not anyone's name I recognized. It just said, "The complication." She came back into the kitchen 30 seconds later, slightly pink, and told me to move the shelf 3 inches to the left. I moved it 3 inches to the left. I said nothing. She said nothing. We ate takeout on her now correctly positioned couch and watched something forgettable on her television, and I went home at 10 and lay in the dark for a long time. thinking about the fact that someone in Nadia's phone was called the complication, and wondering if I was supposed to know who that was. And knowing, somewhere in a place I was actively trying not to look, exactly who it was. I blamed the bookshelf. It was very heavy, and had probably affected my thinking. 3 months later, her sister Maya called me. Maya is 2 years younger than Nadia, faster to say things out loud, and congenitally incapable of holding on to information that feels important. She called to ask whether I was coming to Nadia's engagement party, and then, in the same breath, said she almost called it off. 2 weeks ago. She almost called the whole thing off. I said, "What happened?" Maya said, "I don't know exactly. She just said she needed more time to be sure." Then she paused. "She didn't call you about it?" I said she hadn't. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's weird. You're the first person she calls about everything." I said I was sure it was nothing, that Nadia had probably just been nervous, and that I would see her at the engagement party. I got off the phone and sat down at my kitchen table and thought about the fact that Nadia had almost called off her engagement 2 weeks ago and had not told me. Nadia, who had called me from a fitting room once to describe, in real time, the emotional experience of trying on a coat she felt ambivalent about. She hadn't told me. I went to the engagement party. I smiled and I meant it, because I loved Nadia and I wanted her to be happy, and I had made a very firm decision about my internal library of reasons, which I was renewing the lease on indefinitely. Daniel gave a toast that was warm and a little generic, and the room loved it. Nadia laughed at the right parts and held his hand and looked exactly like a woman who had chosen what she wanted. She looked at me twice during the toast, quick, like she was checking something. I looked away both times. The wedding was in April. A venue outside the city, pale stone and old trees, the kind of place that exists specifically to make people feel like a story is happening to them. I drove out alone. I sat in the 3rd row because that was where the usher pointed, and I did not question this, because I am a man who sits where the usher points. The ceremony started. String quartet. White chairs. The particular hush that settles over a room when something is about to be made permanent. And then Nadia walked in. She was wearing a dress that was simpler than I expected. Clean lines, no excess, exactly like her. She was holding a small bouquet of something white and structural that she had probably approved with a level of specificity that made the florist nervous. She walked toward Daniel, and she looked composed and correct and present, and I thought I was wrong about everything. She chose this, she is sure. And then, maybe 10 feet from the altar, she glanced left. At me. And then she kept walking. The officiant spoke. Daniel spoke. He said things that were true and earnest and said from a place of genuine feeling, and I listened to every word, and I felt like a man standing outside a window, watching a room he had decided not to enter. Then Nadia spoke. She spoke about the person she wanted to be, and the life she wanted to build, and the kind of love she believed in, which was quiet and chosen and not accidental. She spoke carefully, like someone who had written the words 100 times and was aware that words are precise instruments and you do not swing them around carelessly. And when she got to the part where she said "I do," she paused for 1/2 beat, so small that I think only I noticed it, and she looked at me. Just for a second, just long enough, and then she said it. The reception was in a white tent strung with lights. I drank 1 glass of wine and then switched to water, because I had decided I would be completely sober and functional and fine. And I was all 3 of those things except for the part where I was none of them. I talked to people I knew from her life, I said the right things. I ate food I don't remember. She found me at the edge of the tent at 7 o'clock. She was still in the dress. She had taken off the heels. She was holding the small bouquet which had been around all evening, which I had not been able to stop noticing the way you can't stop noticing a prop that keeps appearing in the same story. She stood next to me for a moment without saying anything. We looked out at the dance floor, at the people moving, at the particular happiness of rooms where something has been made official. Then she said quietly, "You've been avoiding me." I said, "You're the bride. Everyone is meant to find you." She said, "That's not what I said." I didn't answer. She turned the bouquet slowly in her hands. The flowers were starting to go soft at the edges. She said, without looking at me, "Do you remember what you said to me the night I almost called it off?" I said, "You didn't tell me about that." She went still. I said it again, carefully, "You didn't call me." She looked at me then, and something in her face shifted, not dramatically, just enough, the way a lock turns over when you finally find the right key. She said, "I wanted to." I picked up my phone and I put it down again, and I picked it up again. She paused. "I didn't call you because if I called you, I knew what I would do." The tent was loud around us. I was very far away from all of it. I said Nadia, just her name. An exit door, held open. She could walk through it, or she could close it. And whichever she chose, I would not pull her either way. That was the only thing I knew how to offer her. She set the bouquet down on the table beside us, very carefully, like she was putting something down she had been carrying for a long time. She said, "My contact name for you in my phone." I said, "The complication." She looked up. You saw it. The night with the bookshelf. She laughed once, soft and wrong-keyed, the real one that got out before she could manage it. She said, "I changed it 3 times. I kept going back to that one." She looked out at the dance floor. I think I thought, if I named it something difficult, I could treat it like a problem to be solved. Something with a solution that wasn't. She stopped. I waited. She said, "I looked at you today, during the vows." I said, "I know. Did you know what it meant?" I said, "I think I've known for a while what it meant. I just kept deciding not to." She was quiet for a long moment. The lights moved over the white tent. Someone laughed loudly across the room. She said, softly, "I made a promise today." I said, "I know that." She said, "I meant it." She turned to look at me fully. Her eyes were steady, which was the most Nadia thing about all of this. She was in the middle of the most complicated moment of her life, and she was completely steady. I meant it. I don't do things I don't mean. You know that about me. I said, "I know." She said, "And I also," she stopped again. Started again. "I also don't say things I don't mean. So I need you to understand that what I'm saying right now is true. And it is what it is, and I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I needed you to know." She held my gaze. "I have loved you for a very long time. I think you know that now. I think part of me is relieved that you know." That landed. In a room full of music and light and people celebrating a thing that had just been made permanent, that landed like a sentence dropped into still water. I said, "I have loved you for a long time too." She nodded once. The look on her face was not relieved, exactly. It was something more complex than that, sad and clear and decided, the face of someone who has made their choice and is living it honestly. She said, "I made a promise today." I said, "I know. I don't want you to break it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the bouquet from the table, and she straightened the flowers once. "Precisely," she said. "I'm glad it was you." In the 3rd row, and then her name came from across the room. Daniel, laughing, waving her back to the dance floor, something warm and easy in his voice, and she turned, and she went back to her life, and I stood at the edge of the tent and let her. Here is what I know about Nadia Chen now. She is a woman who names her complications honestly and carries them carefully, and still makes the promises she makes. She is a woman who, on the day she said I do, looked at the person she couldn't say it to, said it anyway, and meant both things simultaneously. She is the sharpest person I have ever met, and she does not do anything by accident. Not ever. She called me 2 weeks after the wedding, in the morning, before work. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing specific and everything real. She called me the week after that, and the week after that. The complication in her phone became, over the following months, something I understood differently. Not a problem to be solved, but a thing she had named correctly, which she had decided to keep. We are, still, the people we have always been to each other. There is something in that which is enough. There is something in it, some days, which is almost everything. 3 years later, a friend asked me how you know when you love someone. I thought about it for a while. I thought about a bookshelf and a contact name and a half-beat pause on the word I do. I said, I think you know when you find yourself hoping, very quietly, that they chose correctly, even when they didn't choose you. That is not the comforting version of this story. It is the accurate one. What would you have done if your best friend looked at you during their vows? And have you ever loved someone you made the choice not to say it to? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.